Hello, and thank you for joining the BSD SpecLink webinar, The Future of Specifications in BIM Design Integration. My name is Sarah Schumann, Strategic Marketing Manager here at BSD SpecLink, and I'll be your moderator for today. I'd like to start off by introducing our webinar hosts, starting with Judah Jackson. Judah is the product designer of SpecLink Cloud BIM integration. Judah has spent 35 years in the AEC industry. He is a writer and contributor of Autodesk User Group International World Magazine. Judah is a Revit certified implementation expert and Autodesk certified instructor. Also joining us today is Lance Kirby. Lance is the Director of Customer Success here at BSD SpecLink. Lance is also the former project architect at Perkins & Will. He helped develop Revit at Revit Technologies and Autodesk. Lance also supported hundreds of BIM projects and trained thousands of its users over the past 20 years. Lance is also the co-author of 3 books on BIM, including Mastering Autodesk, Revit 2020. And now for the webinar, I'd like to turn things over to Lance. Lance?
Great, thanks, Sarah. Judah and I are going to cover some basic concepts up front and then share some more technical examples. We'll save plenty of time at the end to answer some questions. Here's what we're going to cover in today's webinar. It's focused on the benefits of integrating BIM and specifications. Most important thing, we want to work faster and smarter with fewer errors. Another key point too that we want to cover is coordinating and communicating key design changes throughout the design phase. It's also going to be important to identify and adjust specifications based on changes made in your models. We also want to think about viewing embedded BIM data from the objects and monitor the impact of those changes. So we're also going to be posing some questions at each step for you to ponder, and at the end, you may want us to answer some of those questions, or you may just have your own questions that you want us to discuss. So one of the things that's really important to think about just up front, I know there are probably some wide ranges of experiences in our audience, and so I wanted to cover a few of the basics of BIM just to put that in the context. Others of you know this really well, but may think about it in a different perspective. So building information modeling, or for some, management, is a design methodology that delivers validated and coordinated knowledge about its building project throughout planning, design, construction, and operation. Literally the whole life cycle of the building. So BIM provides designers, contractors, and owners is an important one that you may not be thinking about, with a process to improve decision-making, quality of design. In some cases, can accelerate the building process from concept to occupation. So as specifications to us are one of the most important data models in this integrated database, they also have more impact than sustainability models, costing models, and other connected databases in this project. So as you're listening to this, be thinking about, to you, what specifications and BIM together can achieve. And the next slide, we're going to talk about some project roles. So to me, one of the most important aspects of this is to think about is that we've got some great technology. There's some wonderful processes that have been developed around working through design and construction. But people sometimes often forget that people indeed are the most important aspect of this. We all have different expertise, we have different roles on projects, and it's important to be able to apply those roles. In fact, to me, people are the most important aspect. So what is the role in the team, and what are your responsibilities? What expertise do you provide, and how do you communicate that expertise? The workflow with the tools you deploy for experts decide the efficiency and effectiveness of the projects. in this process, we think of really two main groups and support. Designers, or sometimes known as modelers in BIM, generate design intent from the planning stage through design and documentation. Then you have technical architect and engineers. A prime example, of course, is a spec writer. And they produce deliverables ensuring design intent is built according to professional and industry standards. And then you think about support roles and say the BIM coordinator, supporting these two roles by directing the BIM workflow between design and the technical experts. So as we've seen with the advent of BIM in the workflow of design, we start to see that some of these roles are merging. So what happens when the creative and the technical experts are really the same individual? Now, in terms of efficiency and effectiveness, the primary focus for using BIM is to really make us more efficient and more effective. More efficient by allowing for quicker decisions, less time needed for rework, and the ability to apply automation. More effective by having consistent data across multiple processes, fewer gaps in design workflow, and better analysis from our building simulations. So one of the things we've got here in a graphic is the B. Richards, what they call BIM wedge, developed about a decade or more ago. And one of the things I think is important just to realize is that we're just in the past 10, 15 years getting up into, frankly, level 2, just at the edge of that. So there's plenty of work to be done and plenty of opportunities for us to become more efficient and effective in this process. So an important question for you to consider, if spec writers are working with much of the same data that modelers are, why would you align it manually? Okay. Now, thinking about multiple roles working together, collaboration is the most important aspect. And because, as I said, it's of import to coordinate and communicate key design changes throughout the design phase. The more we use the tools to share the data, the fewer gaps we're going to have in the process. If you have your data and I have my data, we may have answers to questions that no one has asked yet, right? So sharing this data, being transparent with this data is going to generate better collaboration. These workflows determine the methodology for creating data-rich geometries, integrated deliverables, namely specs, and other database-driven processes. The people developing these workflows should choose the tools that support the process. Technology is at its best when we decide how it can work for our work, how it can support us, right? So people first, then processes. Technology is going to adapt to that. When modeling or writing spec books, the people involved are the most important aspects. Who is the producer? Who is the consumer of this data? Another point to consider is this: if more often the spec writer evolves the design's buildability, what data needs to go in the model for spec writing? What information do they need to be sharing for spec writers to take advantage of the information being shared with them? Okay. In terms of synchronization of those models and specs, right? If we're sharing this data back and forth, what is the preferred workflow for your team? It's important for you to identify and adjust specifications based on changes made in your model, or is it to identify and adjust models based on the changes made in your specifications? Okay, which comes first? Both are valid ways of working, right? It really comes down to, who has the origin of the idea and the information that I'm going to use to change or add to or evolve the design process may come from either role. The industry's goal is a single source of truth. So no matter where I look in the project data, I want consistent information. Both are databases with different wrappers. You think about the model, it being a graphical geometric description. Then you think about the specifications. It's a narrative based. Both have their purposes and they have their audiences. And so understanding what is the proper purpose and what is the proper audience for each of those then informs how that thing is to be constructed. As for the future, we think that we're moving toward a singularity, a single database for every phase and use for the building information. So from the beginning and concept and planning and programming all the way to commissioning and operation and maintenance. So this process can build database with information that has each of those phases in mind. Again, ask your team and yourself, what needs to be in the model? What needs to be in the specs? What needs to be in both? And what doesn't need to be in either to optimize our process? Now, with all that, we also think too, if I've got a geometric database, but it sometimes is outside the realm of the workflow of some of our technical staff, in the sense of, well, I'm used to using drawings, 2D representations. Well, why can't you have access to the 3D as well? So another aspect that we've been developing is the ability of the spec writer to reference the graphical data through their own interface. So being able to imbue embedded BIM data and monitor the impact of changes. So really the two aspects allowed by tools are both authoring and analysis. You think about Revit is focused on authoring. Well, I also have the ability to analyze that. And so often that's what the technical designers are doing, is they're reviewing design data. And so we think about our BIM viewer as being an analysis tool. And it's important to review not only for quality, but also for quantity. Again, what is the purpose of the model? Is it used for design intent, environmental simulation, costing data, quantification? All right, more specifically, what data is to be shared with and for the spec writer? Okay, so to me, an important question for the spec writers, does the spec writer need to change the model? Right, so if the spec writer, the author of the narrative, the technical narrative of how the building is to be constructed, what advice might they give the designer working in the model? And could it be applied as a rule in the future to change those models to match up with the technical requirements of that building? All right, so we want to show you some opportunities with this and sharing a demonstration of some of these ideas in practice. So I'm going to turn this over to Judah, and he can walk you through some technical aspects.
Thank you very much, Lance, and thank you everyone for your kind attention. My name is Judah Jackson, and I am on the product development team here at BSD, and my specific focus is the BIM integration for our SpecLink cloud product. So I wanted to explain to you kind of in brief what our thoughts were as we analyzed the needs of our customers relative to a BIM solution and tried to meet those needs, and then demonstrate to you how SpecLink Cloud addresses some of the points that Lance brought up in his presentation, and really presents a cohesive kind of workflow that leverages the work that you do initially in the BIM model for the benefit of the specification writers. Now, what you're seeing here is something you're probably all familiar with. This is the Autodesk Revit modeling interface. This is the first floor of an office building. I think it's built somewhere in England, but it's a good place to kind of tell you the evolution of thought as far as product design goes for specification writing systems. Initially, these systems were little more than advanced word processors, and maybe the first specification writing tools were just pre-built templates that focused more on how the output would look coming off a laser printer than on the actual content. Well, things go forward, and we get into broad adoption with 2D CAD solution and even 3D CAD solutions, and all of a sudden companies are coming up with specification writing software so that you can take the specs that they write and coordinate them properly. Still, the objective of these companies is to be able to put this information into a apparatus that made it very easy to consume, either as a paper product or later on as a PDF product, but it was still based behind 2D design operations. And so once the adoption to BIM started in the early 2000s, we started seeing the advent of using information-rich content for the purposes of design. This door is no longer a rectangle and an arc. This door is now a living object that has data attached to it that describes the details involved in this particular door panel. So what we found was that a very advanced solution for assisting us in getting our plans done and allows us to add to the model information during the design process is now kind of being unleashed into offices and workflows that were very siloed in nature for the previous 20 odd years or so, where the work that the designer did, maybe on a drafting board on a CAD system, was siloed and different from the work that the specification writer did, even though these two disparate parties were basically talking about the same thing. They were all trying to express what was going on in a building. And so, what winds up happening in a situation like that is providers start looking at individual work operations within an office space and then tailor their specific product offerings to fit the needs of those customers. And that's kind of why, the early efforts around specification writing solutions for people who are BIM practitioners often included, a handful of objects that were carefully curated to supply some sort of result when used appropriately in Revit, or a very manual process of having to link things. But basically, it was the same 2D process shoehorned into what is now a three-dimensional information-rich process. And every time a user had to duplicate the effort, in this case, the effort of applying information to the model, what we found was that was an open opportunity for an error to occur. So how could we make sure that the effort you guys are putting into creating these models and getting them with the appropriate information, that information can now be used as a springboard in the specification process? And these two disparate work operations that are happening but are communicating about the same single building under the same roof, we can bring these two people together on a single solution and allow both parties to benefit. So that's what was involved in producing SpecLink Cloud. And SpecLink Cloud is a truly unique solution in that SpecLink Cloud was designed with a BIM workflow in mind. Now, the image that you see on screen is what you would see regarding this project in SpecLink Cloud. Now, we use a proprietary file format called the Virtual Information Model, or VIM, to analyze the Revit file and to reproduce for the specification writer their own version of the model in its current state. Not only replicating the geometry as you see here in the picture, but also giving access to all of the information that is within that geometry, all the information that typically exists in Revit. And we do that by means of a data analysis of the BIM file itself. So as you can see, in this case, we have the capability of taking a look and analyzing the data based on all the appropriate categories within Revit. If there is a category in Revit that is represented in the model, then what we want is one-to-one representation of that particular object in SpecLink Cloud. Now, why would we want that? Well, because it provides us opportunities, frankly, to do other things with the information. I'm going to switch this to querying the information by level, and let's just go to what we see here in level 1. And as you see, what we have here is all of the information about the objects that exist in the format that it existed in Revit has been replicated here in SpecLink Cloud. And I can access any of this information with a single click. Type information, name information, and even manufacturer information. In fact, I have this show more button here that will allow me to see information in greater detail. But when I activated it, you'll notice that now the interactive viewer system is on as well. And I have the opportunity to go and view the object that I'm specifying in 3-dimensional space. So this is a level of insight that specification writers haven't had previously, because even if they have an advanced solution for doing the typing or the word processing work, or even if they have a very thorough, well-researched set of guide specs, they've basically been on the same 2-dimensional view of the project that they've been on for the past 20 or 30 years or so. Maybe it's through PDF now, but they're still looking at a floor plan. What we found from our customers is that valuable insights are obtained by being able to see the object installed in its context within the model. This context often drives other things within the spec as to what might be needed to accurately specify that object. But more importantly, perhaps, being able to tie specification writers, who in a lot of cases are some of the best minds in your company on how a building goes together, into a 3-dimensional representation of that building from the early stages, gives you the ability of having an extra set of eyes on the project. And that allows you to spot changes that need to be made early on. And when I was going through the industry and doing work as an architectural designer, there was a phenomenon called change blindness. There would be something obvious that we needed to work on, but because we were working on something else, our mind said, hey, we'll get back to that later. And then, late Friday night when we're printing the drawings, trying to catch the FedEx truck, that error is still in the plan set and wasn't addressed. Well, because you have a fresh set of eyes on the project, that cuts down the number of times that will happen. And finding out about how things are going together for the purposes of function and design intent early on allows you to optimize the design using the benefits of every person. So it's an all hands on deck approach to design. So being able to put the data in one time in the Revit model and then push it out so that it can be reviewed or modified by the specification writer will allow you to gain efficiencies in being able to produce specs in a more collaborative way. Now, if I go in and when I selected this, I don't know if you noticed what happened here, but when I selected this particular piece of casework, Division 6 appeared automatically with architectural and wood casework pre-selected. Well, that's a functionality where we allow the information in the Revit model to inform the spec writing process by targeting the appropriate sections based on an analysis of the data that's available on that object. And we're able to do this no matter how much or how little data is in your object. So for your BIM coordinators, for the people who are responsible for keeping your library of family content, there are a lot of solutions that are disruptive to your workflow because they tax that person with the additional effort of being able to seed his families with certain, data points or metadata or things like that to trigger a reaction within the specification software. That's one of the primary things we wanted to eliminate. This is a walk-up solution. This is not a disruptive solution. This is a companion. You can actually use SpecLink Cloud right out of the box the second that it's installed, and it's going to accept your family content no matter what state it's in. So no additional work being involved is one of the key factors to being able to adopt this. But it goes further than that. As the appropriate section is suggested, I can confirm that suggestion simply by clicking here. And you notice that my related requirements automatically come up with items pre-selected. While you're going through the process of specifying the elements within your model, our software is paying attention to what you're doing in the form of an AI specific to your company that monitors what you do when certain objects are encountered in Revit, and then uses that information to make informed suggestions as to what should be activated for that object when it is encountered in the future. And we're not talking about encountered in the same project. This intelligence applies globally to all the projects that your company does. So as you're working with this software, you're teaching the system how your specific company handles the writing of specifications. And that's a very, very powerful tool. So when the time comes for you to actually commit all of this to the appropriate spec book, it's as easy as clicking on the sections tab in SLC, and you'll notice you go directly to Division 6. And as I open Division 6, the appropriate sections are already activated, and I am ready to go into the word processing portion of the program to finalize my spec. It really doesn't get easier than that. And for our new spec writers who may have had project design responsibilities in the past, giving them a specification system that doesn't confront them with what looks to be a tidal wave of Excel spreadsheet content, but rather puts them in a familiar environment, giving them a three-dimensional view, makes sure that they're comfortable with the process of writing specs, even if they're completely new to it. So this is going to be an excellent tool, both for people who maybe, have spent their whole career doing specification writing, because they'll have a better understanding of the model, but also for people who are new to the specification writing process, because they're going to have a three-dimensional interface and an AI that's smart enough to help them along the way. Now, the three-dimensional interface also affords other opportunities to be able to explore the model in first person. This leverages technology that has been used for years, but has been primarily applied in the entertainment sector. Basically, we're using similar technology to that what you see your kids using when they play what's called FPS, or first-person shooter games. Instead of running away from innovation or maybe ignoring advances in technology, we're able to leverage, ideas that come from disparate areas. One thing that they use to make games run faster is ambient occlusion and object occlusion based on the sight lines and visibility settings for the camera. We've incorporated all of this functionality within the SpecLink viewer. So it becomes an excellent companion for you to use, not only through the specification writing process, but simply if you want to show someone something in the model that may have been a little bit hard to understand from a 2D perspective. And going back to what we have as far as SLC on the project side goes, as we're putting together the actual spec and preparing it for publication, we noticed that we have to architect a workflow that adapts to the way that you use your building information modeling software. And so we know that workflow is very iterative in nature. So you're going to be processing and uploading several different versions of those models. And when that happens, you're going to need the capability of being able to compare one model versus the other based on what maybe has changed, so that you're constantly aware, of how much work you've completed and how much work there's left to do. This functionality is actually built directly into SLC. So I can actually click on the BIM file itself and go into a compare session. So once you click on the version, the previous version of the file presents itself. And you can see that there has been some changes between the earlier version and the version I have now. So when my compare BIM file button becomes active, once I click on it, I'm able to click here to access the database from the older version of my project. And by carefully selecting the categories that I want to review, in this case, I'll just review them all, I can run a comparative analysis and it'll sweep through the appropriate categories and tell me exactly what has changed from one version to the next, so that I'm always up to date with what needs to be done within the model. So what's the overall result? What we've done is appropriately married the information that's within our Revit files with a very powerful specification writing system. And we've really made it so that the information can be input once, and then all consumers of that information can have their own access point to consume the data and get their work done. And this is a very powerful tool for increasing the efficiency at which you're able to produce your projects, but also improving project accuracy and achieving a better outcome one project after another. Another thing it does is allows you to kind of address, that conversation that happens in so many organizations as to what is the appropriate stopping point as far as LOD goes for our projects as they go out to construction. Are we stopping just short of LOD 400, or is it worth it to push it a little higher? What we say is work the way that you want, work the way that you are now. But when you see that greater efficiencies can be gained by pushing the project to a higher level of detail, maybe it makes your spec writer's job easier, then that work is justified because it's going to bring a powerful return on the time that's involved. See, we're no longer in different siloed processes, huddled over typewriters and drafting boards. We're now a cohesive organization coordinated on a single source of truth and informed not only as to what we need to get our work done, but what we need to get our collaborators' work done as well, and helping each other out along that process. And that's always going to give us a better result. So we're really interested in talking to every one of you individually about this, doing a bit of a deeper dive into actually how we make all this work, and sharing with you some of the success stories that have come from customers just like you who've implemented this technology and have seen what can be gained from a specification writing system that adapts and understands to the way you work and proves to be a valuable assistant in getting the work you do every day done. So please, the end of this, you'll be getting contact information. Reach out to Sarah, reach out to our sales team. And I'll be available as well. I'm sure I'll be talking to some of you in the very near future. And we're anxious for you to give this a try. We think we've got the best specification writing system for anyone that is using Revit in their day-to-day workflow. And we know that you'll think the same thing as well. But that's all I have for today. And with that, we'll hand it back to Lance and Sarah.
Great, thanks, Judah. And one of the things I wanted to reinforce that you said in showing that, I think it's really important to realize that there are lots of different workflows for BIM processes. And to me, we have a flexible and open system. So often people ask, how do I get started? If we're preparing for this inclusion of the specifications in the BIM process, how do I prepare for that? And to me, it's having the understanding of your own teams and their expertise there. How do they work? What are they sharing? But also two, having some processes and standards around those processes. The technology has an amazing way of kind of filling and bridging gaps between your workflow and kind of the manual processes that we go through. So that's really leading us to remind you about some of the things that we talked about today. We want to, obviously in thinking about the future of specifications in BIM, how they're getting closer and closer together. We shared with you how to work faster and smarter with fewer errors. We covered the coordination, communication of key design changes throughout the design phase. We discussed the identification and adjustments of specifications based on changes made in the model. And we also talked about being able to view that embedded BIM object data and monitor the impact of those changes as the design progresses. And we appreciate your time today. And with that, I'm going to hand it back over to Sarah.
Lance, Judah, thank you both so much for your time today and for sharing this incredibly valuable information. To all of our attendees, I wanted to encourage you to follow us on social media. You can find us on Twitter, LinkedIn, and Facebook. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me directly. My email address is schumann@bsdspeclink.com, and I'd be happy to connect you to our team, including Lance and Judah, our webinar hosts today. Until next time, thank you and have a great day.